The 4th of July sun was beating down on over 100 people in my sister's backyard. Music was playing, burgers were grilling, and everyone was laughing. But in the middle of it all, my nephew was standing pale and trembling in the brutal heat, his eyes pleading with me. I walked right through the party, ignoring the perfect smiles and fake pleasantries, and stood in front of my brother-in-law, Trevor, while he was giving a speech to his adoring followers. I let him finish his sentence, and then I used the voice I'd saved for burning buildings and 5-alarm fires. I said 12 words that made the music stop, and every single person turned to stare. That was only the start. That was the day I learned that sometimes the most dangerous fires aren't the ones with flames. They're the ones smoldering behind the perfect facade of a happy family. But before we get into all that, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button, and let me know in the comments what your favorite thing to Grill Island. It helps the channel more than you know. To really understand how a man ends up declaring war at a 4th of July barbecue, you have to go back to that morning. It all started with a video call that felt wrong from the very first second. My phone buzzed on the kitchen counter, showing a picture of my sister, Karen. I answered with a smile, expecting the usual chaotic chat. But the woman on the screen wasn't the sister I knew. Her smile was brittle, stretched too tight across her face like it was painted on. She was sitting in her sterile white living room, the one that looked more like a page from a catalog than a place where people actually lived. "Mike, hi, I'm so glad I caught you," she said, her voice an octave too high. "Trevor and I are having our annual Freedom Fest today, and we were just saying it wouldn't be the same without you. I'm a retired fire captain. For 35 years, my job was to walk into chaos and find the center of the problem in under 30 seconds. You learn to read things other people don't see. The subtle shift in the air before a backdraft, the stress fractures in a wall, the look in a person's eyes when they're telling you everything's fine but their pulse is hammering. And right then, every alarm bell in my head was screaming. Behind Karen, I could just see the back of my nephew Leo's head. He was sitting on a stool at the kitchen island, his shoulders slumped. "Hey Leo, how's it going, buddy?" I said, trying to get him to turn around. He flinched, almost imperceptibly, before slowly turning. My stomach tightened. The kid was 17, he should have been full of life, especially with summer just starting. But his face was gaunt, with dark circles under his eyes that spoke of exhaustion. He looked like a soldier who'd been on watch for 100 nights straight. He gave me a weak wave, and for a split second, his eyes darted to a spot just off camera. It was the quick, nervous glance of someone checking for approval, or for danger. "Hey, Uncle Mike," he mumbled, his voice flat. Before I could ask him what was wrong, Karen's bright, false voice cut in. "Leo's just been so dedicated to his new summer regimen. Trevor has him on a fantastic personal optimization plan. It's all about building resilience and weaponizing discipline. Isn't that right, honey?" She was talking to Leo, but her eyes were also looking at that same spot off camera. It was clear then. Trevor was in the room, just out of sight, directing this whole performance. My brother-in-law, the self-proclaimed life optimization guru, who sold a brand of hyper-discipline and minimalist aesthetics to insecure people with too much money. I'd never liked the man. His philosophy sounded like something a robot would come up with to describe how to be human. He wasn't teaching resilience, he was teaching obedience. I looked at my nephew, this bright, creative kid who used to fill sketchbooks with incredible drawings, now looking like a hollowed-out version of himself. My firefighter's intuition wasn't just whispering anymore, it was shouting. You don't get a look like that from a personal optimization plan, you get a look like that when you're trapped. "Yeah, Karen, sounds great," I said, keeping my voice level. I wouldn't miss it. "What time should I be there?" She rattled off the details, her relief palpable. The call ended, and I stood in my quiet kitchen, the silence feeling heavy and cold. Something was deeply wrong at that house. I didn't know what it was, but I knew I wasn't going to a party anymore. I was heading into a potential 3-alarm fire, and I needed to see for myself just how bad the damage was. The drive over to my sister's place is only about 20 minutes, but it feels like crossing into another country. My neighborhood is filled with brick ranches and 100-year-old oak trees. It's quiet, settled, real. You cross the highway, and suddenly you're in the land of Willow Creek Estates. The name itself sounds like it was dreamed up in a marketing meeting. There are no creeks and no willows, just a sprawling maze of brand-new, identical houses painted in 50 shades of gray, each with a lawn so unnaturally green it looks like it was installed with a staple gun. A high brick wall surrounds the entire development, and you have to get buzzed through a gate like you're entering a minimum security prison for the wealthy. It's a place designed to keep the world out, but as a firefighter, I know that sometimes the worst dangers are the ones you lock inside with you. I parked my old Ford pickup, which looked like a rusted-out farm tool, next to all the Teslas and BMWs, and walked toward the house. The party was already in full swing, spilling from the house into the backyard. It wasn't a barbecue, it was an event. White tents were set up on the lawn, a bartender was serving drinks with muddled herbs, and the music was some kind of minimalist electronic beat that had no soul. It was a perfect reflection of Trevor, curated, cold, and completely artificial. I scanned the crowd, and it didn't take long to spot him. He was standing near a pristine outdoor kitchen, holding court with a group of people who were listening with the kind of rapt attention usually reserved for cult leaders. He was dressed in head-to-toe beige linen, looking relaxed and confident. The key is to eliminate emotional drag, he was saying, making a slicing motion with his hand. Anxiety? That's just inefficient data processing. Guilt? That's a backward-facing energy expenditure. You have to curate your reality, trim the fat, and live an intentional, optimized life. The people around him nodded seriously, their faces full of admiration. I felt a knot of disgust tighten in my stomach. He talked about human emotions like they were bugs in a software program that needed to be patched. He wasn't helping people, he was teaching them to be unfeeling robots. While he was pontificating, I saw Leo. My nephew was weaving through the crowd with a heavy tray of appetizers, his movements stiff and robotic. He was wearing a plain black t-shirt and jeans, a stark contrast to the guests' expensive summer attire. He was staff. At his own family's party, his stepfather had turned him into the help. He kept his eyes down, avoiding contact, handing out skewers of melon and prosciutto with a forced, vacant smile. His face was already flushed from the heat, and a sheen of sweat covered his forehead. I started moving toward him, determined to get a word with him alone. I finally caught his eye as he was setting the empty tray down near the drink station. "Leo," I said, keeping my voice low. "You okay? You look like you're running on fumes." He jumped, startled, and for a second, a flash of genuine fear crossed his face before the mask slammed back into place. "I'm fine, Uncle Mike. Just busy. Trevor wants everything to be perfect." He started wiping down the already spotless counter, a pointless, nervous task. "It's 100 degrees out here, son. Have you had any water?" "You need to stay hydrated," I said, my captain's voice kicking in out of instinct. "I will. I just have to." "There he is, my man." A hand landed on my shoulder, and Trevor's voice, smooth as oil, boomed next to me. He had materialized out of thin air, his smile wide and welcoming, but his eyes were like chips of ice. He completely ignored me and addressed Leo. "Leo, my man, great work on the appetizers. We're demonstrating the principle of service-based value, aren't we? Excellent. Now, I see Mrs. Davison's glass is empty. Let's be proactive about optimizing her guest experience." Every word was a command wrapped in the flimsy packaging of his self-help nonsense. It was a masterclass in public humiliation disguised as encouragement. He was telling Leo, in front of me, that his only value was as a servant. "Sure, Trevor," Leo mumbled, not looking at either of us as he picked up a pitcher of iced tea and walked away. Trevor turned his full attention to me, the smile never leaving his face. "Mike, so glad you could make it." Karen was thrilled. "You have to try the quinoa salad. It's a complete protein, fantastic for maintaining peak energy levels throughout the day." He steered me away from the drink station, his hand on my back a firm, guiding pressure. He was subtly, expertly controlling my movement, isolating me from his target. The whole time, his eyes were scanning the party, assessing everything, like a general surveying a battlefield. I was just another piece on the board he needed to manage. The anxiety in my gut was churning now. This wasn't just a case of a jerk stepfather. This was calculated, systematic control. And I just watched him run a play, live and in person. I was no longer a guest at a party. I was a witness on a scene. And the smoke was getting thicker by the minute. Trevor kept me pinned in a conversation that was all smoke and mirrors. He talked about his upcoming retreat on biohacking your inner alpha and his new line of sustainably sourced, minimalist hemp clothing. It was like listening to a foreign language I had no desire to learn. I nodded along, my eyes scanning over his shoulder, trying to keep a visual on Leo. My nephew was working on autopilot, his face a blank canvas. He was refilling a large glass dispenser with a bright red fruit punch, his hands trembling slightly from either the heat or nerves. I could see the fatigue in the slump of his shoulders, the way he moved like every limb was weighted down with lead. The problem with modern society, Trevor droned on, gesturing with a dismissive wave at the world outside his perfect bubble, is a surplus of choice and a deficit of intention. We empower people to declutter their lives so they can unlock their peak potential. As he said the word potential, it happened. Leo, turning from the drink table with a full pitcher to refresh the dispenser, seemed to catch his foot on the leg of a chair. It was a small, clumsy movement, the kind any overtired teenager would make. But the result was catastrophic. He stumbled forward, trying to regain his balance, and the pitcher flew from his grasp. Time seemed to slow down, the way it does right before an impact. The glass pitcher twisted through the air, and a perfect arc of crimson liquid sailed through the sunlight and landed directly in the center of Trevor's prized possession, a massive, immaculate, brutally white sofa that sat in the middle of their open-plan living room, visible to the entire party through the wall of glass doors. The sound that followed was a wet, sickening splash, followed by the sharp crack of the pitcher shattering on the polished concrete floor. A collective gasp went through the party. The music, the chatter, everything just stopped. It was dead silent. In that perfect, frozen moment, I wasn't looking at the couch. I was looking at Trevor. For one single, solitary second, the mask of the enlightened guru didn't just slip, it vaporized. The charming smile, the relaxed posture, the calm eyes, all gone. What replaced it was something ugly and ancient. His face became a rigid mask of fury. His jaw clenched so tight I could see the muscle bunch along his jawline. But it was his eyes that stopped my breath. They weren't just angry. They were filled with a cold reptilian rage, a look of such profound contempt and hatred that it made the hairs on my arms stand up. It was the look of a king whose priceless artifact had been smashed by a clumsy slave. In that 1 second, I saw the real Trevor, the one Leo saw every single day. Then, just as quickly, he was back. The transformation was so fast it was terrifying. He blinked, and the monster was gone. He let out a hearty, theatrical laugh that sounded completely manufactured. "Well," he boomed, spreading his hands wide. "It seems the universe has decided to spontaneously express a little chaos. No worries, everyone. It's just a couch, an object. And we don't let objects define our emotional state, do we?" A few of his followers let out nervous, appreciative chuckles. Karen rushed forward with a handful of napkins, her face pale with panic. Trevor waved her off gently. "It's all right, my love. Let's not react. Let's respond." He turned to Leo, who was standing frozen in the middle of the room, looking at the red stains spreading like a pool of blood. He looked like he was about to be physically ill. Trevor walked over to him and put a hand on his shoulder. To the rest of the party, it probably looked like a gesture of forgiveness. But I was close enough to see the truth. I saw his fingers dig into the muscle of Leo's shoulder, a grip of iron disguised as a comforting touch. He leaned in close, his voice a low, pleasant murmur that didn't reach the rest of the crowd, but his smile was gone. His smile was a razor blade. "Let's go get the cleaning supplies and take care of this, buddy," he said. "We'll turn this into a teachable moment." He steered Leo, who was moving like a puppet with its strings cut, toward the back of the house, away from the party. Away from any witnesses. The party slowly started to buzz back to life, but I couldn't move. The dread in my gut had solidified into a cold, hard stone. I knew what a teachable moment meant in Trevor's language. It wasn't about cleaning a couch, it was about punishment. And I had a sickening feeling that I was the only one here who cared enough to find out what that punishment was. The party rebooted itself with an eerie efficiency. Trevor's followers, well versed in the art of ignoring unpleasantness, immediately resumed their conversations about stock options and Peloton scores. The red stain on the white couch was quickly covered with an artfully thrown beige blanket, and within minutes the incident was effectively erased. But I couldn't erase it. I stood there, nursing a bottle of water I didn't want, trapped in a meaningless conversation with a woman who was explaining how intermittent fasting had unlocked her cellular potential. All I could think about was Leo. Every minute that ticked by felt like an hour. I watched the sun crawl higher in the sky, beating down relentlessly. 10 minutes, 20, 45, an hour. An hour had passed since Trevor had led my nephew away. There was no sign of either of them. My patience, already worn thin, finally snapped. I excused myself mid-sentence and started my search. I was no longer an uncle. I was a captain on a scene, performing a primary search of a structure. I moved through the house first. It was empty, a cool and quiet tomb of white walls and minimalist furniture. I checked the garage empty, save for a white Tesla plugged into the wall. I checked the basement, a converted home gym with more stainless steel equipment than a commercial fitness center. Nothing. No sign of a struggle. No sign of cleaning supplies. No sign of Leo. The dread in my stomach was now a cold, heavy lump of ice. I went back outside, my eyes scanning the property. The main party was contained on the large stone patio. But the yard was massive, a perfect green carpet that rolled back toward a thick, ornamental hedge of cypress trees designed for privacy. If you were going to hide something, that's where you'd do it. I walked the perimeter of the lawn, my boots sinking into the unnaturally soft grass, the cheerful party music fading behind me. As I rounded the edge of the cypress wall, I saw it, and the sight stopped me dead in my tracks. There, in a patch of raw, unforgiving earth behind the decorative hedge, completely hidden from the party, was Leo. The temperature was easily 100 degrees, the air thick and shimmering with heat rising from the baked ground, and Leo was digging. He had a heavy, clumsy-looking shovel in his hands and was hacking away at the hard, clay-like soil. He was digging a trench, about 10 feet long and a few feet deep. It served no purpose. There were no pipes to lay, no plants to put in. It was just a hole in the ground. It was pointless, grueling, manual labor designed for one thing: punishment. My blood ran cold, but my mind went into professional assessment mode. The scene was wrong, all wrong. Leo was wearing a dark t-shirt and heavy jeans, the worst possible clothing for this heat. His face, when he paused to catch his breath, was shockingly pale under a film of dirt and sweat. His lips had a bluish tint. He was clumsy, his movements uncoordinated, stumbling with the shovel as if it weighed 100 pounds. But the detail that sent a jolt of pure, professional terror through me was his skin. He wasn't dripping with sweat anymore. His face was unnervingly dry. Every firefighter knows what that means. It's a late-stage sign of severe heat stroke. The body has lost its ability to cool itself down. It's the final alarm bell before the system shuts down completely. Before seizures, organ failure, death. He didn't see me. He was in his own world of pain, mumbling to himself, his eyes unfocused. He plunged the shovel into the earth again, but his knees buckled, and he fell to the ground, catching himself on his hands. He stayed there for a moment, head hanging, his body trembling with exhaustion. The horror that had been building in me all day finally gave way to something else. It was a rage so cold and so focused it felt like ice water in my veins. This wasn't discipline. This wasn't a teachable moment. This was torture. This was a man trying to break a child, hiding it behind a wall of cypress trees and self-help garbage. Trevor wasn't just a narcissist or a bully. He was a clear and present danger to the life of my nephew. And as I stood there, hidden by the trees, watching Leo struggle just to push himself back to his feet, my mission became crystal clear. The search was over. Now, it was a rescue. I didn't shout. I didn't run. In a crisis, you move with purpose. I stepped out from behind the cypress trees, and my voice cut through the thick, hot air with the calm authority I'd used on 1,000 emergency scenes. Leo, that's enough. Drop the shovel. He looked up, startled, his eyes wide and unfocused. He didn't seem to recognize me for a second. He just saw a figure of authority, and his first instinct was fear. I have to finish, he mumbled, his words slurring together. Trevor said I have to finish the trench before I can have any water. That's not happening, I said, closing the distance between us in 3 long strides. I gently took the heavy shovel from his hands. It came away with no resistance and tossed it aside. Come on, son. We're getting you out of the Sunday now. I put my arm around his shoulders to guide him. His body was limp and shockingly hot to the touch, even through his sweat-soaked shirt. He stumbled, and I had to half carry him the few feet into the shade of the cypress trees. Sit down, I commanded, easing him to the ground. Lie back. Get your feet up. I found a large decorative rock and propped his legs up on it to help with the blood flow and treat for shock. His breathing was shallow and rapid. I ran a quick mental checklist: pale, clammy skin that was hot to the touch, confusion and slurred speech, lack of sweat. My gut had been right. This wasn't just heat exhaustion. This was full-blown heat stroke, a true medical emergency. "Uncle Mike, please," he whispered, his eyes fluttering. "You can't. If he sees you, he'll be so mad. It'll be so much worse for me. Please, just go." Hearing him beg on behalf of his own tormentor sent a fresh wave of ice-cold fury through me, but I kept my voice even. My first priority was the victim. "Nobody is going to make anything worse for you ever again, Leo. I promise you that. Right now, we need to get your core temperature down." I looked around frantically. A thick black garden hose was coiled up near a spigot on the side of the house. Perfect. I cranked the handle, and after a sputtering gasp, cool water began to flow. I grabbed the hose and brought it over to Leo. "This is going to be cold, buddy," I warned, and then I began to douse him, starting with his head and neck, letting the cool water run over his chest and arms. He gasped from the shock of the cold, but I kept the stream of water on him. I soaked the collar of his shirt and the cuffs of his jeans. It was a battlefield first aid technique, but it was effective. As the water worked its magic, a little bit of clarity seemed to return to his eyes. But with clarity came a deeper, more profound terror. "No, no, no, you don't understand," he pleaded, trying to sit up. He said, "If I ever told anyone, if I ever made him look bad, you have to go, please." I put a firm but gentle hand on his shoulder, keeping him down. "Listen to me, Leo. What he's doing to you is not discipline. It's not a teachable moment. It's abuse. And it's over." The words hung in the air between us, stark and final. This wasn't just about a spilled drink. The way Leo was talking, the sheer terror in his eyes. This was a pattern. This had been going on for a long, long time, right under our noses. My failure to see it, my sister's failure to stop it, the guilt was a physical weight, but I pushed it down. Guilt wouldn't help him. Action would. I let him sip some water from the hose, just a little at a time. The color was slowly starting to return to his face, but he was still weak, still trembling. The immediate danger was passing, but the real threat was still holding court just 100 yards away, charming a crowd of oblivious guests. I looked at my nephew, this good, kind kid, lying broken in the dirt behind a wall of decorative trees, and my determination hardened into something unbreakable. The fire captain in me had handled the emergency. Now, the uncle was about to handle the cause. "Stay right here," I said, my voice low and steady. "I'll be right back." "Where are you going?" he asked, his voice shaking. I stood up and looked back toward the party, where the faint sound of laughter drifted on the hot air. "I'm going to go have a talk with Trevor." Leo was shaking his head, his voice a panicked whisper. "You can't. He'll kill me. Please, Uncle Mike, let's just go." "We are going," I said, my voice softer now, for his ears only. "But we're not sneaking out the back gate like criminals. We're walking straight through the front door." I helped him to his feet. He was unsteady, leaning on me heavily. I grabbed the half-full water bottle I'd left on the counter hours ago and pressed it into his hand. "Keep sipping this. Don't stop." And then we started walking. We moved out from the cover of the cypress trees and back into the harsh sunlight, a slow, deliberate march across 50 yards of perfectly manicured lawn. We were a spectacle. A retired, grime-covered firefighter in an old t-shirt and work boots, supporting a pale, trembling teenager who looked like he'd just survived a disaster. The party guests saw us first. Conversations faltered, heads turned. A ripple of confusion and discomfort spread through the crowd. The minimalist electronic music suddenly sounded obscene against the reality of what they were seeing. I kept my eyes locked on one target, Trevor. He was standing on the patio, back in his element, holding a microphone now, likely in the middle of some self-aggrandizing speech. He hadn't seen us yet. My sister Karen was standing beside him, smiling that brittle, practiced smile. She saw us first, and the smile didn't just fade, it shattered. All the color drained from her face. She put a hand on Trevor's arm, but it was too late. We were already at the edge of the patio, and that is the foundation of the optimized life, Trevor was saying into the microphone, his voice smooth and confident. "It's about seizing control of your own narrative, eliminating weakness." "Trevor," I said. My voice wasn't a shout, but it was a captain's voice. It was clear, sharp, and cut through the air like a siren, silencing him mid-sentence. He turned, annoyed at the interruption, and then he saw us. He saw Leo leaning on me, pale and soaked, and for the second time that day, the mask slipped. This time it wasn't just rage. It was the pure, animal panic of being exposed. I didn't give him a chance to recover. I stepped onto the patio, helping Leo into a nearby chair, and then I turned to face my brother-in-law in front of his 50-some disciples. "While you were in here talking about eliminating weakness," I said, my voice ringing with cold clarity in the sudden silence, "your son was outside suffering from severe heat stroke. So I have a question for you, Trevor. What kind of man punishes a kid by nearly killing him?" A wave of shocked murmurs went through the crowd. Trevor stared at me, his face a mask of disbelief. He tried to laugh it off, grabbing the microphone again. "Whoa there, Mike. Settle down. You're always so dramatic," he said, trying to play to the crowd. Leo and I were having a session on building physical and mental fortitude. He's learning about consequences. It's a core part of his growth. Growth? I took a step closer, my voice dropping, becoming harder, more dangerous. "Let me tell you what I found while you were in here growing." I found him with pale, clammy skin, a core temperature I'd estimate at over 103, and pupils that were dilated and sluggish. He was confused, his speech was slurred, and most importantly, he had stopped sweating. "Do you have any idea what that means, Trevor, or is that not covered in your self-help seminars?" He stared at me, speechless. The crowd was silent, hanging on every word. I didn't wait for an answer. "It's called heat stroke. It's a medical emergency. It's what happens right before the seizures start, right before the kidneys and the liver shut down. You talk about optimizing things. Let me tell you what happens when a human body is no longer optimized to cool itself. The brain begins to cook inside the skull. That's not character building, Trevor. That's negligent homicide waiting to happen." I let the words hang in the hot, still air. Trevor's face was white. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. He looked to his followers for support, but for the first time, they weren't looking at him with admiration. They were looking at Leo, slumped in the chair, and then back at Trevor with dawning horror and disgust. His power over them was evaporating in real time. "He spilled some punch on your precious white couch," I finished, my voice now laced with the contempt I'd been holding back all day. "And for that, you decided to bake him in the sun until his organs started to fail. You're not a guru, Trevor. You're just a bully who's so terrified of his own weakness that he has to torture a 17-year-old kid to feel like a man." I turned my back on him then, a final, deliberate act of dismissal. I knelt in front of Leo, ignoring the 50 pairs of eyes on us. "Come on, son," I said gently. "Let's get you out of here." The party was over. I had just burned it to the ground. For a long moment, nobody moved. The only sound was the quiet, soulless thumping of the electronic music, a ghost of the perfect party that had been happening just minutes before. The guests stood like statues, their faces a mixture of shock, pity, and morbid curiosity. They were staring at a car wreck, and they couldn't look away. I ignored them all. My focus was on Leo. I gently squeezed his shoulder, and he looked up at me, his eyes full of a terrifying, fragile hope I hadn't seen before. The spell was finally broken by my sister. Karen rushed forward, her hands fluttering nervously. She didn't go to Leo. She came to me, her voice a desperate, pleading whisper. "Mike, please, stop. Don't do this in front of all these people. We can talk about this inside. We can fix this. Please, don't ruin everything." "Ruin everything?" The words echoed in my head. She was looking at the smoldering wreckage of her son's well-being, and her first thought was about saving the furniture. A deep, profound sadness washed over me, a grief for the strong, protective sister I used to know. "Karen," I said, my voice low and heavy, with a finality that even she couldn't misinterpret. "You had years to fix this as a family. Every time you looked the other way, every time you made an excuse for him, that was your chance. That time is over." "You have no right," a voice snarled from behind me. It was Trevor. His public humiliation had burned away the last of his composure, leaving something raw and venomous. He stepped forward, his fists clenched, his face red and blotchy with rage. "You can't just walk into my house and take my son. That's kidnapping. I'll have you arrested. I'll sue you for everything you have, you miserable old man." I didn't even turn to look at him. I kept my eyes on Leo, who flinched back from Trevor's voice. I calmly helped my nephew to his feet, putting my body squarely between him and his tormentor. I was a shield, and I could feel the heat of Trevor's rage radiating against my back. "Go ahead and call the police, Trevor," I said over my shoulder, my voice flat and devoid of emotion. "I'm sure they'd be very interested to hear your methods for building character. Make sure you tell them about the trench and the 100-degree heat and the fact that you denied a child water. I'll wait for their call." That was it. I had called his bluff. We both knew a police report was the last thing he wanted. His entire brand was built on an image of perfect, controlled strength. An arrest for child endangerment would be the end of him. He was silent, seething but silent. "Leo," Karen begged, her hand reaching for her son's arm. "Don't go. Please, don't leave me with him." The words were a quiet, terrified admission. For the first time, she was admitting she was a prisoner, too. For a long moment, Leo hesitated. I felt his whole body tense up. Then, with a strength I didn't know he possessed, he gently pulled his arm away from his mother's grasp. He didn't say a word. He just looked at her, his expression a heartbreaking mix of love and betrayal, and then he turned and took a step toward the driveway. His choice was made. That one step broke the spell. I put a steadying arm around his shoulder, and we started walking, straight through the heart of the party. The crowd of guests parted for us, like we were the sea itself. No one spoke. No one met my eyes. They just stared, their faces pale. We walked past the grill, now cold and smoking. We walked past the bar, with its rows of untouched glasses. We walked past the pristine white couch, with its ugly red scar. As we reached the edge of the driveway, I heard Trevor's voice one last time, a final, impotent threat shouted at our backs. "You'll regret this, Mike. You hear me? You'll both regret this." We didn't look back. We just kept walking, one slow, deliberate step after another, until we reached my old Ford pickup. I helped Leo into the passenger seat, closed the door, and walked around to my side. As I started the engine, the familiar rumble felt like the sound of freedom. I put the truck in reverse and backed out of the driveway, away from the silent party, away from the sterile gray house, away from the man who was now just a small, furious figure shrinking in my rearview mirror. We were out, we were safe. But as we pulled up to the security gate and waited for it to open, I knew this wasn't the end. It was just the end of the battle. The war was just beginning. The 10-mile drive from Willow Creek Estates to my small brick house was the quietest I've ever experienced. We didn't speak. The truck's radio was off. The only sound was the hum of the engine and the air conditioning blasting on high. Leo sat huddled against the passenger door, staring out the window at the passing scenery, though I don't think he was really seeing any of it. He was in shock, a soldier just pulled from the front line, his body present but his mind still somewhere back in the noise and the smoke. I didn't push him, I just drove. My house is the complete opposite of my sister's. It's small, a little cluttered, and every object has a story. The armchair in the living room is worn down in the exact shape of my body. The coffee table has a permanent ring on it from a mug I set down 20 years ago. The walls are covered in photos of my wife, my firefighting crew, and a dozen pictures of Leo and Karen from before Trevor. It's not a showpiece, it's a home. It smells like old books and coffee. It smells safe. I led Leo inside, and the first thing I did was get him into the shower. "Just stand under the cool water for as long as you need," I told him, handing him a clean towel and a soft, worn-out t-shirt of mine. While he was in there, I went to the kitchen and made 2 grilled cheese sandwiches and poured 2 tall glasses of milk. It's what I used to make for him when he was a kid and would stay the night. It felt like the only thing to do. When he came out, wrapped in one of my old bathrobes, his face scrubbed clean, he looked even younger than 17. The haunted, exhausted look was still in his eyes, but some of the immediate terror had receded. We sat at my small kitchen table in silence, eating the sandwiches. The quiet wasn't tense anymore. It was heavy, weighted with everything that hadn't been said. He finished his sandwich and pushed the plate away. He was staring at a framed photo on my refrigerator, one taken about 5 years ago at a county fair. In it, he's a goofy 12-year-old with a mouthful of cotton candy, and Karen has her arm around him, laughing, her face open and genuinely happy. It was the last picture I had of them before Trevor entered our lives. "She used to be like that all the time," he said, his voice barely a whisper. The dam was cracking. I just nodded, staying quiet, letting him find the words. When he first came around, Leo started, his eyes still fixed on the photo. It seemed okay. He was all about being positive and motivated. He bought my mom nice things. He helped me with my homework. He said he wanted to be a mentor. But then, the little things started. He took a shaky breath. He started by optimizing my diet. No more pizza nights, no more sugar. Everything had to be weighed and logged in an app. He said he was unlocking my physical potential. Then he optimized my schedule. He said my friends were a low-value time expenditure. So he cut my time with them down to 1 hour a week. I had to earn it. I just listened, my heart breaking with every word, the grilled cheese in my stomach turning to lead. This was so much worse than I could have imagined. Everything became a lesson. If I left a dish in the sink, I wasn't just being lazy, I was exhibiting entropy, and I'd have to write a 500-word essay on the principles of household order. If I got a B on a test, he'd make me do push-ups until my arms gave out while he lectured me about how excellence is a habit, not an act. He called it consequence training. He finally looked away from the photo and met my eyes. His were swimming with tears he refused to let fall. He never just hit me. It was always more clever than that. Last winter, I was 10 minutes late coming home because the bus was delayed. As punishment, I was locked out of the house for the night. He told my mom it was a real-world simulation of the consequences of unreliability. I slept in the garage. It was so cold. The rage I felt was a physical thing, a hot pressure building behind my ribs. But I kept my face calm, my voice steady. And your mother, she let this happen? He let out a short, bitter laugh that sounded more like a sob. She changed. At first she tried to argue with him, but he's so good with words. He'd twist everything around until she was apologizing to him. He'd say he was just trying to make me a stronger man, that she was coddling me, that her maternal sentimentality was holding me back. Eventually, she just started to agree with him. She started using his words. Optimization, intentionality, entropy. It was like he rewrote her brain. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a raw, painful whisper. The worst part, Uncle Mike, the absolute worst part wasn't the essays or the push-ups or sleeping in the garage. It was watching her watch it happen. Sometimes, I'd look at her while he was lecturing me, and I'd see a flicker of the mom from that picture. I'd see the horror in her eyes. But she would never say anything. She'd just look away. That was worse than anything he could ever do. Feeling her leave me there alone. He finally broke then. The tears he'd been fighting started to stream down his face, silent and hot. He didn't make a sound. He just sat there and cried, all the pain and fear and loneliness of the past 3 years pouring out of him. I got up from my chair, walked around the table, and pulled him into a hug. He was so thin. I could feel his bones through the old t-shirt. He collapsed against me, his body shaking with silent sobs. I just held him, my own eyes burning. I held my sister's son and let him cry it all out. All the rules, all the punishments, all the cold, calculated cruelty. It was all out in the open now, laid bare in the safety of my small, quiet kitchen. The full picture was finally clear, and it was the ugliest thing I had ever seen. After the storm of his confession, a profound exhaustion settled over Leo. The adrenaline from the escape and the emotional weight of his story left him completely drained. I got him a blanket and set him up on the big, worn-out couch in the living room. He was asleep in minutes, a deep, motionless sleep of someone who hadn't truly rested in years. I sat in my armchair across from him, watching the steady rise and fall of his chest. For the first time in 3 years, he was safe. My house was a sanctuary. I stood watch in the quiet darkness, feeling the familiar weight of responsibility settle over me, the way it always did on a long night shift at the firehouse. The feeling of being the one who stands between the innocent and the fire. I must have sat there for nearly 2 hours. The only sound was the hum of the refrigerator and the gentle ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. It was in that peaceful quiet that I heard it. It wasn't a friendly knock. It was a sharp, authoritative rap, rap, rap on my front door. The kind of knock that doesn't ask, it demands. It was the kind of knock that means the world outside has found you. Leo stirred on the couch, his brow furrowing in his sleep. I stood up silently and moved to the front door, my heart a heavy, steady drum against my ribs. I knew, with a certainty that was bone deep, who was on the other side. I looked through the peephole, and the peaceful night shattered. The flashing red and blue lights of a police cruiser washed over my lawn, painting the trees in strobing, nightmarish colors. 2 uniformed officers stood on my porch, and just behind them, standing in the pulsing lights, was Trevor. He was wearing a fresh linen shirt, his arms crossed, his face a perfect mask of concerned gravity. Next to him stood my sister, Karen, looking small and broken, her face streaked with tears. I took a deep breath, marshaled every bit of calm I had learned in 35 years of running into burning buildings, and opened the door. I positioned my body in the doorway, blocking their view of the living room. "Michael Callahan?" the older of the 2 officers asked. He had a tired, seen-it-all look in his eyes. "That's me," I said, my voice even. Before the officer could continue, Trevor stepped forward, his voice oozing a rehearsed, reasonable concern. "Officer, thank you again for your prompt response. We've been worried sick." He gestured toward me. As I explained, my brother-in-law Mike has had some issues with emotional regulation in the past. Today, he had a very public outburst at our home. He became physically aggressive, and then he forced my stepson Leo to leave with him. "We're just here to bring our son home safely." It was a brilliant performance. Every word was carefully chosen to paint me as the unstable, violent aggressor, and him as the calm, rational father trying to de-escalate. He was using his well-practiced manipulation skills on law enforcement, and I could see the officer's neutral expression tighten with a flicker of suspicion in my direction. Karen just stood there crying silently, which only made Trevor's story seem more credible. She looked like a distraught wife standing by her husband after a traumatic event. "Is that how it happened, Mr. Callahan?" the officer asked, his eyes on me. I ignored Trevor completely, addressing only the officer. My voice was low and firm. "Officer, my nephew Leo is inside. He is here of his own free will. He is currently sleeping because he is recovering from a severe case of heat stroke that was inflicted upon him by that man," I said, giving a single sharp nod toward Trevor. "As for an assault, I never laid a hand on him. I did, however, publicly accuse him of child endangerment. Perhaps that's what he's referring to." A flicker of something surprise, maybe confusion, crossed the officer's face. I had just presented a competing narrative, one that was just as calm and far more specific than Trevor's vague accusations. Trevor let out a sad, patronizing sigh. "You see what I mean? He creates these elaborate, paranoid fantasies. It's a very difficult situation for our family. All we want is to see that Leo is okay." "Your concern is touching, Trevor," I said, my voice dripping with ice. The officer held up a hand, cutting us both off. He had the weary posture of a man who had refereed 1,000 of these domestic disputes. "All right, I've heard 2 different stories. Mr. Callahan, is the boy Leo able to speak with us?" "He's exhausted," I said, not moving from the doorway. "He's been through a significant ordeal." "We have a right to see our son." Trevor's voice rose, the calm facade cracking for just a moment, revealing the anger beneath. "Sir, calm down," the officer told him, then looked back at me. "Look, we can do this the easy way or the hard way. The call was made. We need to verify the wellness of the minor." "He's 17, I corrected, almost 18. "The young man," the officer amended, "and determine if he is here against his will. The easiest way to do that is for you to let us come inside and talk to everyone involved." I looked past him at Trevor, who was now wearing a smug, confident little smile. This was his plan all along. To use the authority of the police to get back inside, to get to Leo, to corner us in my own home. He thought he had me trapped, but just like at the party, he was underestimating me. He had no idea what a cornered firefighter was capable of. "All right, officer," I said, stepping back from the door. "Come on in, let's talk." The 4 of us, 2 cops, a predator, and a victim, crowded into my small living room. The intrusion of the uniforms and the flashing lights visible through the window made the familiar space feel alien and hostile. Leo was jolted awake by the voices, his eyes flying open in panic. When he saw Trevor standing there, smug and confident, all the color drained from his face. He instinctively tried to make himself smaller, pulling the blanket tighter around his shoulders. The older officer, whose name tag read Miller, took in the scene with a practiced, unreadable expression. "All right," he said, his voice calm but authoritative. "Here's how this is going to work. I'm going to speak with the young man first." "Ma'am," he said to Karen, "you can stay, as you're his mother. Everyone else, please wait in the kitchen. We'll speak with you next." Trevor opened his mouth to protest, but a sharp look from Officer Miller silenced him. He shot me a look of pure hatred before turning and walking into my kitchen, his posture rigid with indignation. I followed, leaning against the counter, my arms crossed. We stood in a tense, suffocating silence, able to hear the low murmur of voices from the other room. In the living room, Officer Miller knelt, so he was at eye level with Leo on the couch. His tone was gentle. "Son, my name is Officer Miller. Can you tell me your name?" "Leo," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "Okay, Leo, I need you to answer a few questions for me, honestly. Are you here against your will?" Leo's eyes darted to his mother, who was standing by the armchair, wringing her hands, her face a mask of misery. He hesitated, the years of conditioning warring with the flicker of hope I'd given him. "No," he finally said, so quietly the officer had to lean in. I wanted to come with him. Trevor let out a sharp, audible scoff from the kitchen. I shot him a look that could have melted steel. Officer Miller continued, his eyes scanning Leo's face, noting the cracked lips, the unnatural pallor beneath his sunburn. Your stepfather says your uncle assaulted him and forced you to leave. Is that true? No, Leo said, a little stronger this time. He got me out of the Sunday He made me dig a hole, as punishment. It was really hot. A punishment for what? I spilled punch on the couch, Leo mumbled, shamefaced, as if he were confessing to a real crime. The officer made a note in his pad. He'd seen the ugly red stain himself when he walked in. It was all starting to click into place. After a few more questions, he left Leo with his partner and came into the kitchen. He looked at me. Your turn, Mr. Callahan. Tell me your version. I didn't get emotional. I didn't raise my voice. I gave him my testimony with the same calm, factual precision I would use to file an official incident report. Officer, I was a captain with the city fire department for 35 years. I've personally treated or supervised the treatment of hundreds of cases of heat-related emergencies. What I witnessed today was not a parenting disagreement. It was a case of life-threatening criminal negligence. I laid it all out, my arrival, Trevor's behavior, the incident with the couch, and my discovery of Leo an hour later. I described his physical symptoms in detail, the dry skin, the slurred speech, the lack of sweat, and the first aid steps I took. In my professional opinion, my nephew was in the advanced stages of heat stroke. If he had remained out there for another 30 minutes, he would have been unconscious. Another hour, and he might have been dead. I did not assault that man. I rescued my nephew. Any father, any decent human being would have done the same. My words, backed by the weight of my career, landed with a heavy, undeniable authority. Officer Miller's expression was grim. He knew I wasn't exaggerating. He turned to Trevor, whose smug confidence was beginning to look a lot like cornered panic. Sir, you want to respond to that? It's a complete fabrication, Trevor blustered. He's twisting a simple disciplinary action into something sinister to justify his own aggression. Finally, Officer Miller turned to the last witness, the one whose testimony would either condemn her son or save him. Ma'am, he said, his voice softening slightly as he looked at my sister. I have 3 different stories here. I need you to tell me the truth. What really happened to your son today? This was it, the moment of truth. Trevor stared at her, his eyes cold and full of warning. Karen looked from Trevor's threatening face to her son's pleading one. She looked at Leo, really looked at him, at his sunburnt skin, at the way he was trembling, at the desperate hope in his eyes. And in that moment, something inside her finally, irrevocably, broke. He's telling the truth, she whispered, her voice cracking. Who is? The officer prompted gently. She took a shaky breath and looked directly at the officer, tears streaming down her face. My brother, she said, her voice gaining a strength I hadn't heard in years. Mike is telling the truth. Trevor locked the door. He told Leo he couldn't have any water until the trench was finished. He told me to leave him out there, that it would teach him a lesson. She was sobbing openly now, the words tumbling out in a rush of guilt and grief. He does things like this all the time. The punishments, they just get worse and worse. And I let him. Oh God, I let him. The confession hung in the air, raw and absolute. It was over. The lies had been burned away, and all that was left was the ugly, horrifying truth. Officer Miller looked from my weeping sister to Trevor, whose face was a mixture of shock and pure, murderous rage. Miller's expression was no longer tired or neutral. It was cold and hard as granite. He looked at his partner and gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. The endgame had arrived. The moment Karen's confession ended, the air in the room shifted. It became charged, official. Officer Miller's partner, who had been standing silently by the door, took a deliberate step forward. Trevor, seeing the movement, finally seemed to grasp the reality of the situation. The panic in his eyes was real now. Now, hold on, he started, his voice a desperate, placating whine. Let's not overreact. This is clearly an emotional, family-related issue. My wife is overwrought. She doesn't know what she's saying. Sir, Officer Miller said, his voice cutting through Trevor's excuses like a scalpel. Turn around and put your hands behind your back. You can't be serious, Trevor sputtered, taking a step backward. You're going to arrest me? Me? based on the hysterical ramblings of a bitter old man and his emotional wife? He looked around the room, searching for an ally, for someone who still believed in the illusion he had so carefully crafted. But he found nothing. He was alone. The younger officer was already on him, firmly taking his arm and twisting it behind his back with practiced efficiency. The click of the handcuffs snapping shut was a loud, definitive sound in the quiet room. It was the sound of a lock turning, of a cage door closing. It was the sound of justice. "You have the right to remain silent," Officer Miller began, his voice a steady, formal monotone as he read Trevor his rights. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Trevor didn't seem to hear him. He was staring at Karen, his face a mask of pure, venomous disbelief. "You did this," he hissed, the words dripping with poison. "You weak, pathetic woman. You just destroyed our life. You'll have nothing. You'll be nothing without me." Karen flinched as if he had struck her, but she didn't look away. Through her tears, she held his gaze, and for the first time, I saw no fear in her eyes. Only a profound, bottomless sorrow. They led him out of my house. I stood by the door and watched them put him in the back of the cruiser, a pathetic, sputtering man stripped of all his power. The red and blue lights washed over his face as he shouted his final, empty threats, and then the car door slammed shut, cutting him off. The cruiser pulled away from the curb, and its lights disappeared down the street, plunging my quiet neighborhood back into darkness. The silence that descended on the house in the wake of the sirens was the loudest thing I had ever heard. It was a heavy, suffocating quiet, filled with the ghosts of everything that had just happened. The immediate danger was gone, but the wreckage was everywhere. Karen, who had been standing rigid throughout the arrest, finally collapsed. Her legs gave out, and she sank into my armchair, her body folding in on itself. A sound I had never heard before tore from her throat, a deep, guttural sob of pure, undiluted agony. It was the sound of a soul breaking. She cried for years of fear, for her complicity, for her broken son, for the life she had just burned to the ground. I looked at Leo. He was still on the couch, watching his mother, his face completely numb. The victory he had just won didn't look like a victory at all. It looked like devastation. He slowly stood up, walked over to the armchair, and knelt on the floor beside his mother. He didn't hug her, he didn't speak. He just rested his hand on her shaking arm, a small, tentative gesture of shared ruin. I stood there for a long moment, watching the two of them, the broken pieces of my family, clinging to each other in the aftermath of the storm. The righteous fury I had felt was gone, washed away by a tide of profound exhaustion. There was no triumph in this, no joy, only a grim, weary relief. The fire was out, the immediate threat was neutralized. But now came the long, hard part, sifting through the ashes, seeing what, if anything, could be saved. I went into the kitchen, filled the kettle with water, and set it on the stove to boil. It was all I could think of to do. 6 months can feel like a lifetime, or it can feel like the blink of an eye. For us, it felt like both. The brutal, oppressive heat of that 4th of July had given way to the quiet, gentle cold of Christmas. My small house, once a silent monument to my past, was now cluttered and alive. A lopsided Christmas tree stood in the corner of the living room, covered in a mismatched collection of old and new ornaments. Leo's sketchbook and charcoal pencils had taken over a corner of the kitchen table, and a stack of books from the local library where Karen now worked part-time was always piled high on the end table. The silence was gone, replaced by the low murmur of conversation, the sound of the television, and sometimes the quiet strumming of the old guitar I'd found for Leo in the attic. That Christmas Eve, we were sitting in the living room, the only light coming from the colored bulbs on the tree. A quiet fire crackled in the hearth. Karen was knitting something, her brow furrowed in concentration, but her face relaxed and peaceful in a way I hadn't seen in years. The divorce had been finalized a month ago. Trevor, facing a mountain of evidence and a felony child endangerment charge, had taken a plea deal. He'd lost his reputation, his money, and he was serving a short sentence upstate, followed by a long period of probation. A restraining order ensured he was a ghost, a bad memory we no longer had to fear. Leo was sitting on the floor, sketching in his book. He looked like a different person. The gaunt, haunted look was gone, replaced by a healthy, easy confidence. He'd not only finished his high school credits, but had been accepted early into the state university's graphic design program with a small scholarship. He was finding his voice again, not just in conversation, but on the page. His art was bold and full of life. He held up the sketchbook to show us. It was a drawing of the three of us, sitting right there in the living room, rendered in soft, warm charcoal. In the drawing, we all looked content. "It's beautiful, honey," Karen said, her voice thick with emotion. She reached out and rested her hand on his hair, a simple, maternal gesture that would have been impossible 6 months ago. Their relationship was a slow, careful thing, being rebuilt one tentative conversation, one shared cup of tea at a time. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. Therapy was helping her unpack the years of fear and complicity, and for the first time she was learning to stand on her own 2 feet. "You've really captured my good side," I joked, pointing to the slightly exaggerated paunch he'd given my character in the drawing. Leo laughed, a real, genuine laugh that filled the room. "It's called artistic realism, Uncle Mike." That sound, his easy laughter, was the greatest gift I could have asked for. We had been through the fire, all of us. The scars were there, no doubt. They would probably always be there, faint white lines on our souls, but we had survived. We had walked out of the ashes and found our way back to each other. Looking at my sister, no longer a prisoner in her own life, and my nephew, with a future full of possibility stretched out before him, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. We were a strange, broken little crew, the three of us. We were a family forged not by tradition but by trauma and truth. And as the fire popped and crackled in the grate, casting dancing shadows on the walls, I knew, deep in my bones, that we were going to be all right. Later that night, long after Karen and Leo had gone to bed, I was still sitting in my armchair. The fire had burned down to a soft, glowing bed of embers, and the house was filled with a deep and contented silence. Outside, a gentle snow had begun to fall, the big fluffy flakes drifting down and blanketing the world in a fresh, clean layer of white. It was quiet, it was peaceful, it was safe. I thought about that day back in July, about the perfect green lawn and the ugly, pointless trench Leo was forced to dig. For years I'd run into burning buildings, and I thought I knew what danger looked like. It was smoke and flames and the scream of twisting metal, but I was wrong. The most dangerous fires aren't always the loudest. Sometimes they're the ones that burn silently, hidden away behind a perfect facade. They smolder inside the walls, chewing away at the foundations, consuming everything from the inside out until the whole structure is rotten, ready to collapse into ash at the slightest touch. That's what Trevor's abuse was. It was a slow, quiet, invisible fire. And my sister and my nephew had been trapped inside it for years, slowly suffocating, forgetting what clean air even felt like. In the fire service, we live by a simple, unspoken code. It's not written down in any manual, but every single one of us knows it in our bones. When the alarm bell rings, you go. You don't ask if it's convenient. You don't worry about getting hurt. You run towards the fire, not away from it. You put your body, your training, your entire being between the danger and the people who need saving. And you never, ever leave anyone behind. For a long time, I thought I'd retired from that life. I thought I'd hung up my helmet and was done running into burning buildings. But that day, I realized the code doesn't have a retirement age. It doesn't just apply to your job, it applies to your life, to your family. I didn't do anything extraordinary. I didn't do anything that any decent person shouldn't do. I just heard an alarm bell ringing in my gut, and I answered the call. I ran toward the fire that was consuming the people I loved, and I pulled them out. I looked around my quiet living room, at the lopsided tree, at Leo's sketchbook on the table, at the half-finished scarf my sister was knitting. This was the aftermath. This was what we had built from the ashes. It wasn't perfect or polished. It was messy and complicated and a little bit broken, but it was real, and it was ours. The embers in the fireplace glowed one last time before fading into velvety darkness. I finally stood up, my old bones aching, and turned off the lights on the Christmas tree. The house was safe. My family was sleeping soundly. My watch was over, at least for tonight. And for the first time in a long, long time, I felt a profound sense of peace.